Hi, I'm Matt Redham, and I am one of the many faces of ACEs in Butte County. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and have been for the last 17 years. I'm also the policy and practice coordinator for Trauma Transformed in the Bay Area, and I work for Colusa County Office of Education doing therapy. I got started not quite understanding why I was even a therapist, and I slowly came to realize that I probably wasn't ever going to be anything else but a therapist. My family growing up was what I thought was normal. When I was about 2 years old, my mom dropped me off with my grandparents. I know now that my parents are divorced when I was, I think, 6 months old. And I didn't have any, I didn't remember my parents being together, but there was domestic violence early on. And then I started living with my grandparents, and I had no concept of why that was. And life was really good then. Things were structured. From 0 to 11, things were really, I played violin, went to tennis camp. I did things that middle-class white kids are typically allowed to do and encouraged to do. And my mom was pretty severely mentally ill. And so pretty quickly, within 3 months, I think, my life went from predictable and consistent to pretty chaotic. That was really when ACEs started in some respects. And, I was a needy little fellow, like many kids are who are in situations that are abusive, and unfortunately was really ripe for perpetration, and survived complex sexual abuse for about 2 years from a teacher, and locked it away, put it somewhere else, made it through, and then I somehow reached adulthood and went to college and certainly struggled, but that was, that was my life growing up, and it took a long time to really realize that life was, when I would talk about it, it seemed like I was talking about somebody else's life. And it wasn't really until my adulthood that I understood what I had been through. I think the way I became familiar with what my ACEs were, what my adversity was, and was after I got into the work that I was doing as a therapist. I realized very early on a lot of the kids I was working with, they only had one commonality, and that was the adversity that they'd experienced. So the way they would show that adversity was completely different depending on who they were. And the diagnoses that they had were completely different. But the one variable they all had was they had abuse, they had neglect, they were in the system. And so I started researching trauma as much as I could, not realizing, I don't think, that I was also researching why I was the way I was. I don't think I was aware of the ACE study until probably about 10 years ago, but I think when I started learning about trauma and complex trauma, I also, I figured out a lot about the kids I was working with, but I also figured out I had that moment that a lot of us have, which is like, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. In fact, the very things that I thought I was crazy for are the things that have kept me alive. And that was a real moment of sort of shifting how I looked at resilience, how I looked at trauma, how I looked at ACEs. As a white man, my ACEs could end. So, when I sought treatment and when I started to heal, my privilege has allowed me to do that. And I say that because I think that no matter how much I look at resilience and I look at healing, I also recognize that, there were these racial protective factors that I have and these gender protective factors that I have. And a lot of the kids I work with, a lot of the people I work with don't have that luxury. So they can heal, but they still live in a system, in a society that they experience ACEs all the time. So for me, I experience it in the stories I hear. I hear my own story all the time. You know, if I'm talking to a kid and they were abused or they were neglected, I'm hearing my story. And I think for a long time when I was in private practice seeing a lot of kids, I didn't think that mattered. And then I wound up with meningitis and sick and burned out and not okay. So I think for those of us who've survived what we've survived, it's always a balance between advocacy being what helps me stay sane and productive, and living within the world of trauma and resilience can also just kind of eat away at me. On a very basic level, like I go to a school and my heart races. I'm 42 years old. I know a lot about this stuff, and it still lives in me. I'm always surprised that it's sort of like a little shadow that kind of lingers right behind you at all times. The resources I think that have helped me are not system resources. I think what I did have though was my childhood 0 to 11 was pretty good. So I had a foundation that allowed me to withstand a lot. I had strong relationships within my family of people that I could sort of hold in my head even through the things I was going through. And then in my adult life, you know, I had treatment. You know, I had treatment for alcohol and substance abuse. I had treatment for post-traumatic stress. And I had the resources available to me to access those things. But I think the biggest thing has been my work and the kind of people I work with and around. That is probably the biggest thing. And a family, you know, and a partner that understands, doesn't understand and understands. I think those are the things that have allowed me to kind of thrive in the life that I live. My early experiences have shaped who I am in every way. You know, I don't know if I'll ever be at the point where I say, you know, I'm really glad that happened. That was super. I think I would have been a good person regardless. And I think there are ways in which I understand a side of life that a lot of people don't, in a way that isn't academic or intellectual or something I could learn in class. It's just that I know. And so if I sit in front of a kid who's had the same experience, I don't have to say anything. You know, I think it's also gave me an appreciation for what I do have and for the privilege that I do have, and guilt about that. And probably the thing that's helped me most in my profession is I don't see the kids that I work with as damaged. I don't see them as needing a diagnosis. In fact, I don't even see them as needing to be changed. I see other people around them needing to see that their resilience isn't something they need to get to, it's their baseline. I mean, what I see as most powerful in terms of healing is community. And I mean, it's a tricky thing because oftentimes community, those people who struggle the most have the hardest time being accepted by community. But I think community can be found in a lot of different ways, right? And I think advocacy, being able to do something with the anger that you justifiably have, usually, and to funnel it towards change, has saved my life.